doing it in advance rather than trying to in an emergency is going to be very expensive. And the other one I've learned over time is it to kind of treat it as just fact, right? It's not personal. Like if you say I'm not going to spend it, then it's like, okay. I mean, you're not going to spend it. That's fine. I'm not going to throw a tantrum about it. As long as you understand the risks of not spending that money.
The Band-Aid's always going to cost more and yield less.
No! Why do all my 30-year-old electronics keep breaking on me?
On this episode, we discuss digital signage, technical debt, and spring cleaning. All that and more on EdTech. EdTech episode 118, Reactive versus Proactive. Hello, AV friends. Welcome to another episode of EdTech. As always, we have our panel of awesome higher ed AV professionals. Ernie Bailey.
Good morning, Harry.
Hi. And we have also Rob Rasberry.
Hey, Aaron. Always great to be here. Good to see everybody.
And Scott Tyner.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be back.
And today's special guest joining us for this episode is Paul Dorin from Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, thanks. Long-time listener. Glad to be here.
And so tell everyone what you do over here.
So I'm the AV Services Coordinator, and I mostly deal with event and classroom support communications, as well as calendar management and billing.
And he's definitely very much an indispensable member of my team. And glad that he could join us today since we kind of had a last minute guest who wasn't unable to make it. So thank you so much, Paul, for stepping in last minute and joining us.
Hey, my pleasure.
So let's jump into the articles that we read for this episode. The first one we read can be found on av.technology. Infocom focuses on digital signage. So Infocom will include an exciting digital signage program, which will feature training courses, the D-Sign conference, workshops, networking events, and a digital signage focused show floor tour. So, and I thought this was an interesting statistic that the Infocom trade show floor will feature more than 100 exhibitors that'll showcase digital signage solutions. With that said, how important is digital signage to the higher ed market?
I don't know how relative, I guess it varies from institution to institution, but digital signage has come such a long way where it's no longer just to display an event or an advertisement or something like that. It's actually sort of become its own communication ecosystem. So when you think about it from different levels, you can use digital signage in so many different ways. You can use it in front of classrooms to talk about scheduling and have students maybe, reserve a space. You can use it for university-wide, announcements, heaven forbid, emergencies, wayfinder stuff. I mean, it's incredible the leaps and bounds that digital signage has taken over the last few years, so that it in and of itself has so many multi-purpose uses that, more universities, including us, are saying, hey, this is really something, great and can be used in many different ways. Like, I remember it must have been maybe within the last few years, like we were testing out some digital signage thing and it was able to stream live events. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And so now that's almost like a standard, but digital signage is just, again, it does so much now that I'm going to say it can be a very big part of a higher education, ecosystem.
How is digital signage handled on your campus currently?
So we actually just purchased, I believe, a big reach, installation. So it depends upon where you are. I mean, we haven't deployed it campus wide yet, but it's being used for announcements, messages. Athletics uses it to promote their stuff. In some buildings, they are using some digital signage for rooms, but that's not something that's been, rolled out completely campus wide. So we're just sort of touching on, bringing it into sort of a full-fledged, full-featured kind of set. But if I have to say what part is it being used for now, it's really more just information at this point. But we all understand what it can do and sort of are developing a roadmap of where we want it to go, where, it would be great to have all the rooms have, signage outside of them to give information not only for classrooms, but events, everything.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, I agree with Rob completely. First of all, it depends on your institution, right? The traditional digital signage that we think of, a monitor hanging in a wall, we've got them here. I don't know why we continue to put them up. There's not current information on them. Nobody pays attention to them. I think one of the big hopes I've always had is about emergency communication. And I think we have some movement on that now. And unfortunately, because of what happened here in Lewiston or earlier, late last year, there's these certain tools. I mean, there's this flashcast tool that is simply amazing and cheap and can kind of just get overlaid over any screen. So if you think of kind of that as digital signage, that becomes important. The other piece that Rob mentioned is the classroom schedules outside of a room, or particularly conference rooms or meeting rooms. If you're considering that digital signage, we have a few buildings here where people still print out a piece of paper in the morning and stick it on the door. And I'm like, the second you printed that out, it was obsolete. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think things like that would be very, very helpful. But for us, that kind of traditional digital signage, I just don't see that value in.
We're putting in some digital signage. We have a good bit more, we're a teaching hospital. The hospital side uses a lot more than we do, but we do have them reaching into the education buildings. We do have upcoming events. We do keep it current. So that is a good thing. We do have a coordinator for all the digital signage on campus. It's actually based out of our web management office. So the same group that manages the outward-facing web pages for the campus manages the digital signage. So we have the same information going out on both. There are still some things that I'd like to see changed. There's the little ribbon banner across the bottom says no RSS feed available at this time. Why can't we just delete that bar, or, put some basic information, put weather on it, let it, you tie it to the Weather Channel or whatever. Now we're changing our digital signage provider. The one that we've been using for years has gone out of business, and their devices go end of life and no more support whatsoever July 1st. So we've purchased another one that's used by other campuses within our university system. They've had some good luck with. And then my team has been tasked with trying to install the new devices. Explain to them we're overtasked building out classrooms. So we'll try to do these one or two at a time, but we cannot deploy them all during the summer when they want to do it, because that is our install time. But we're working with them. Like I said, we're seeing more of them pop up in the education areas. We're seeing some research and class information show up on some. We have some old digital signage systems tied to the room scheduling system that are in each building that show what's scheduled within that building. We're looking at tie-ins to bring that into the main digital signage system, so it's just one of the pages that comes across. So we have less wall hanging displays, but almost all of our classrooms and lecture halls do have this small little scheduling panel outside showing what's scheduled, what's coming up in the room, whether the room's occupied or not, that type of information. So we have some. It's not a big push on our campus, except really in the patient care areas, and we stay out of those as much as possible.
Yeah, and over here on Hopkins, we have conference rooms with signs that change, daily per event. And then in the theater, we have some content of flyers for different events in the theater, upcoming concerts and things like that. And then, I got a request yesterday for the dean's office to have some digital signage element to their new office space. So it's more and more being requested in spaces, and it can be really handy if it can be managed remotely rather than having to physically go and upload stuff. It's just a matter of if there's networking and infrastructure over here.
One of the things on our campus that's been one of the biggest struggles is the trying to centralize on one platform, because the athletics and like the student services, they use one platform. The conference services, they've kind of partnered with us a little bit to use at least the same one that we kind of use, but it's also then different from another group. So now that we have a new student center coming online, there has been a bit of a push for us to sort of decide on one standard and roll it out across the board. But yeah, the content upkeep, it has always, I feel like, been a challenge. And it's sort of somebody has to be responsible for it and take ownership of it. And maybe that's part of it, is that digital signage has still fallen into this void where nobody really has like clear ownership of it. So even though as the AV team, a lot of times will take care of the physical signage itself, the display that it's on, but we're not the ones who are doing what the content creation and upkeep and stuff like that. There was actually an article that was read for an AV Week episode not that long ago, where it was talked about like digital signage as a service. And that was something that kind of intrigued me, especially if some of that content creation was offloaded onto somebody else. And there might be a value there. But yeah, digital signage is definitely, coming a long way, and there's definitely a need for it in higher ed. It's just finding its home.
Well, we still see a lot of posters go up around about guest speakers coming in, and you have the easel clutter at a lot of hallway intersections and stuff. And I'm thinking, what we spend on printing those posters for all over campus, each event could probably pay for one digital sign as we go around the campus. So I'd like to see it expand, but I don't know that I want it to be in my group. I don't want to manage it.
Yeah, and that's a key question, like both of you mentioned, like right. Who's going to manage it? So honestly, we're just starting it out here. But right now, it's really more student services that's sort of taking the lead on it. And so in its use, it's used more for informational, dissemination events, information, in dorms, here in the Corman Center out front, there's a student lobby. There's a couple displays out there. So there's all kinds of information going on there. But it's recognized, like I believe our CCI, which is our computing and informatics department, they have tablets outside their classrooms that have scheduling. So there's different levels, but again, who's going to manage it? And sort of what's nice with this centralized system is, and especially with, I think the system that we have is, say a department wants to, buy into it, they have to understand, okay, well, who's the person that's going to handle your content and be responsible for this? This is not something you're going to just send to a central person and have all that happen. Each person has to take responsibility in their area, in their department for the content that they're doing. There may be somebody that is the gatekeeper to say, okay, this is good, this is fine, you may need to change this. But individuals need to, come together as a group to aggregate in order to get this done. It's not one person or a couple people. There's no way somebody can do that.
Something that Ernie said was kind of a good transition into the next article that we read, talking about the digital signage system reaching end of life. So we read the article Avoiding Technical Debt on Rave Pubs, written by our own Scott Tyner. And so let's talk a little bit more about like what is technical debt and how can we avoid this?
I think we probably have talked about this a little bit more, but I wrote about it again because I specifically think about technical debt and talking about it in a different way than a standard maintenance and replacement plan. You have to get there, of course, right? But a lot of people don't. And so for me, being able to always have that literal elevator pitch, if you end up with your CIO or your CFO and they're saying, geez, Scott, why didn't you just put in a $100,000 budget request, that you can really talk about? And I think you're right. Ernie's example was awesome. Well, we have a digital signage system which goes end of life. Yes, we can continue to run it, but as soon as there's a problem, catastrophic failure starts to happen, and we're either shutting off all the monitors, we're unplugging stuff, or we're spending 2, 3, 4 times the amount of money we would if we planned it to put in a Band-Aid. This isn't I think what a lot of people hear, especially with AV, is they just want to replace that projector because it's 6 years old. And this is, we do have to replace a projector when it's 6, 7, 8 years old. But this is beyond that. This is, that projector's actually still running RGBHV. And so when that dies, you're not going to get a projector that does that anymore. You're going to need one with Cat 5. So we're going to have to rip the ceiling apart and put Cat 5 up into there, and you're not going to be able to have classrooms in there. So really being able to kind of understand that, plan that out, and have that story ready to tell people to go along with your maintenance plans and to really build these in long term. And we've dealt with them before, right? We dealt with the analog sunset, which also came along with screens that used to be 4x3 and then had to be 16x9. And so just making sure that we're always on top of that and have that story ready to go.
I've talked about this at Infocom presentations in the past, and I actually wrote about this back when we had printed magazines instead of blogs. So one of the first things that I wrote was actually on this subject. So Scott, I was really glad to see you bring it back up to the forefront. But, we used to, when I first started, we had absolutely no budget for AV gear. And if a major device went down, back in those days, it was a Xenon slide projector, something like that, or a 16 millimeter movie projector. We just had to go and ask the leadership, ask the CFO or the chancellor or whoever for emergency funds to replace this because we can't fix it anymore. We've fixed it as many times as possible. We got some new leadership in, and we were able to, we were already seeing, budget for other, for teaching labs for some of their equipment, and early days of computers for testing. They had money to replace the computers every X number of years, but we still had nothing for our AV equipment. We got a new provost in. I met with him, said, this is what we'd like to do. Got his buy-in. We developed a budget, a huge budget, it looked like. But after a year, we went back and looked at what we had been requesting for these emergency replacements versus what we needed to spend to regularly update and not have the downtime. We're spending less money keeping the equipment current than we were repairing and emergency replacement of a certain device. And we went from being a reactive department to a proactive department. We gained more respect from the faculty, from the students, from the campus leadership. And when I said we needed to do something, they knew that I was serious and I wasn't just trying to spend money. I was trying to make the place a better place for our students and for our learning. And it's allowed us to grow our department. We now have our own integration team. So
that's reactive to proactive. I love that phrase. That is just so awesome. And also when you're thinking along these lines, you're justifying a roadmap than just a one-time purchase or, replacing something, making, the powers that be understand that in the long run, making this long-term justification and purchase is going to save you money, even though we always try that. And sometimes they get the sticker shock. But once, like you said, Ernie, pull up, well, it's 5,000 for somebody to come out and just replace a basic piece of equipment. And then, we have to wait for them to ship it back. And who knows, all these other, factors that come into it, rather than you have a system that has, a refresh cycle and technology that works consistently. It's easy to fix. Then, they hopefully see the bigger picture. And Scott, this great article. I really loved it.
I think it's as Ernie pointed out, right? It's having that story to tell, and Ernie had that story to tell. He succeeded in telling that story, and it changed things. And a big one, obviously, is about money, and it's true that doing it in advance rather than trying to, in an emergency is going to be very expensive. And the other one I've learned over time is to kind of treat it as just fact, right? It's not personal. Like if you say I'm not going to spend it, then it's like, okay. I mean, you're not going to spend it. That's fine. I'm not going to throw a tantrum about it. As long as you understand the risks of not spending that money.
The Band-Aid's always going to cost more and yield less.
Yeah.
And I think they also, may not take into account that, sure, there's typical inflation, but then there's technical inflation where we saw it recently where post-COVID, almost every piece of equipment that we use on the regular automatically just jumped up 20 to 30%. So had we just been able to buy it when it was initially needed and requested, that's even right there, 20 to 30% that could have gotten saved. So this next article is spring cleaning. This came from this month's IT in AV column by James King over at Higher Ed AV Media. Stop, breathe, think, and do. What a simple yet great approach to, really it's to any task, but especially when it comes to kind of cleaning up your space, I feel like this could help, especially for those like myself that can feel overwhelmed by the task at hand. And, especially because it can feel so Herculean. But if you could just pause that moment and think about it and then do, that's fantastic. So what are your, best practices for when you clean up your spaces, or do you even get to clean up your spaces?
We do what we call a room sweep. It's the end of each semester, or the beginning of each semester, however you want to look at it, where we go through and we straighten out the cabling and clean out cabinets, remove gear that hasn't been used. Kind of going back to what we were just talking about, we use, we're able to gather data on what's being used in the classroom now with the new stuff. So if we see something that hadn't been used for a couple of semesters, we may pull it out, get it out of the way. We occasionally do the same stop, breathe, think, and do on the programs that we're running, the software side of it as well. Try to keep things clean. We, as well as we clean out any cache on the computers, any, profiles or anything that have been stored in them, just taking up space. But so we do, software cleanup as well as hardware cleanup. And it kind of leads us back into the being proactive, making sure things are working. When we go in to sweep a room, as we call it, we check everything. Even we check the light fixtures, the thermostats, even though those aren't our areas, we cut a work order to the physical team to come over and fix those, or, carpets pulling up in the corner, room needs paint. We do all of that at one time, even if it's not our responsibility. What I have told my guys is, we take total ownership of the space. If we have teaching gear in there and we're the ones called in to service it, we're the ones that everybody sees in the room. So they call us about a full trash can, or the temperature's wrong, or the blinds aren't working. So we just go in and we make sure everything is working at least twice a year. in every single space. And then when we go through just on weekly checks of the rooms or whatever, we can quickly see, because they're used to checking everything, and make sure everything's in good shape. So, but we do kind of do a spring cleaning, except we do ours, like I said, between semesters.
Yeah, I think that's sort of, I can't speak obviously for a whole lot of people, but at Drexel, it's the same way between terms. As soon as it's the end of exams, if we have a couple extra days, then we'll start room checks and go through the break between the terms. Typically, we do a little more. It's interesting because I hate to say in spring, at the end of spring, before the spring term, because we're coming up very soon to the end of fiscal for us. And so there's a lot of new classroom or new projects that happen during the summer. And just the time just before that is our best time really to take a look at the classrooms, even though, like Ernie said, we do it in between each term.
I always kind of laugh at myself because I always think at this time of year, my gosh, I can't wait till June 1st. I'm going to be able to get so much done. And on June 1st, I'm really good at the stop and the breathe. We need to get a little bit better at the think and the do. Or maybe not even the think, because I think one of the things that's nice about that we do tend to do is if we go into a room and replace a projector by an emergency or whatever, we leave cables hanging, we'll put that ticket on hold and we'll come back to it on June 1st. And because it's actually kind of nice to just go in, all I got to do in this room is clean up some wires. All I've got to do is do it. It's not a lot of thinking. You can kind of almost relax doing it before you get into what Rob described as that really crazy summer season where you're just doing all kinds of installs. But you have to note it somewhere so that you know to go back and do those things because you put so much time and effort in when you installed it to make it look neat that if you don't, you'll kick yourself.
I was reading this article. I thought the really interesting part was the data portion of it and how we clean up what data we collect. Like we have a list of our IP addresses and what pieces of gear are in every room, but when I was reading this, I thought, what about like collecting the MAC addies and making sure those are all in when we switch a projector? Sometimes it gets missed. And like something else that's missing from our list would be the date of service that we implemented that equipment. It would be handy to have. I don't know if we'll get to it this break, but you know, it's there's a lot of really good points in this article.
Absolutely. I also not only have to do a bit of spring cleaning in my own office, because I find that during the semester of hectic and go and meetings and whatnot, I just have kind of pile things up a little bit. And so I've got like a stack of demo gear and a stack of notebooks that I scribble notes into and then just put them all in there. So now I'm like, all right, now that, you know, once things dip down a little bit and slow down, I can maybe get to cleaning up my own space, which will help probably free up a lot of mental space also. This has been a great episode, guys. Thank you so much. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, Ernie, how might they?
LinkedIn's a good way to get a hold of me usually.
Okay. And how about you, Rob?
LinkedIn is great.
And Scott?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on X, and I write for Rave Pubs.
Excellent. And Paul, thank you so much for joining us. How might somebody reach out to you?
My pleasure. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can find me at linkedin.com/in/sound and audio.
And as for me, you can find me here on the EdTech podcast every month and also on LinkedIn, on the HETMA community, on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, at Smirna_off_ice. And see you next time.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.